Hello, everybody. Christina Previtt here, and I am back with the older adult edition of the PT on Ice podcast. Dustin and I were in New Orleans presenting at CSM last week, and coming from the Canadian context, I was telling people that as I came into CSM, it was almost like this deer in the headlights moment about just the pure scale and magnitude of this conference. It was incredible to see. The Old Not Weak talk that Dustin and I gave was so successful, and we're so thankful for the amount of interest in this topic. And I think it makes me even more excited because we're starting to see these conversations happening about how we're properly dosing exercise programs for our older clients, how we can continue to challenge them in a very safe way. And we had people from a whole spectrum of different areas, from acute care, home health, outpatient orthopedics, in hospital, in private practice. And it just shows that some of the principles that we're talking about when it comes to exercise prescription design for the older adults just span across the practice setting, and that's super, super exciting. Dustin and I are going to be talking at the ICE Sampler in April. So if you guys haven't got your tickets yet, there is going to be just a slew of ICE faculty there, and it's going to be really, really exciting. And so piggybacking on some of the exercise-based prescription principles that we were talking about at CSM and that Dustin and I have talked about on the podcast, I actually wanted to talk about starting an exercise program for the older adult. This is something that I've had experience doing in multiple settings, and it's something that I get asked all the time. So I thought that I would do a podcast episode about it so that I could share some of the things that I've learned, some of the obstacles and barriers that I've tried to navigate the best that I can, and start a conversation about some of the best ways to offer a group-based exercise program for the older adult. To give you a little bit of context, before I started my PhD on the use of exercise for at-risk older adults, I actually had started a group-based exercise program for some of the older clients that I was seeing in my private practice. The reason why I did that is I would have some of my older clients come into the gym where I was treating as a physiotherapist. We would work on strengthening for whatever their ailment or condition was. I would discharge. There would be a series of deconditioning, and then they would be back in my clinic. And I thought that this type of system wasn't necessarily the best system. And I had a pretty good grasp of some of the exercise principles, the strength and conditioning principles. And I didn't necessarily know where to refer my clients to that I knew had the necessary knowledge base. Not that it wasn't there, I just didn't know where to refer to. So I thought that I would do it in-house. And so I started an exercise program where people with different chronic conditions or a more complicated medical history could still have medical supervision from me as a physical therapist, but it wasn't necessarily that they were seeing me one-on-one for active treatment. And then when we started Stave Off here in Kingston, that was one of our pillars. Because in a group-based setting, there's this peer-to-peer connection that is so powerful, where we have older adults who have been in our program for 6 months to a year, who have gone a very long way across their journey, and talking to people who are just starting, who are in their 60s and 70s, who haven't had the same exercise history throughout their life. Maybe they were really active in their job, or exercise was just never something that was a priority for them in their life. It can be really, really powerful to have that peer-to-peer connection, coupled with having that security that there's a coach that has a certain amount of knowledge in the front of the class. And so I have notes because I wanted to make sure that I touched on everything. So before I talk about this, and maybe this is me being a little bit protective, But I have had people come up to me and say, Christina, I want to start an exercise program for older adults. And then I say, oh, that's super interesting. I think that's great. That's something that we need. Why do you want to do that? And the first thing that they say to me is, well, we're in an aging demographic and it's a great business decision. And so my caveat is that if that is the reason why if it's just purely a business decision, this is me being protective, it may not be the best reason to start an exercise program for the older client, because this is a passion project of mine and I just want to make sure that I'm protecting my older clients. And so you want to make sure that you're coming from the right place and that you really, this isn't just a business decision for you. Okay. So things to consider when we're starting an exercise program. The biggest thing that I have seen as a barrier is that, of course, as we get older, functional status is very broad. So if you're thinking about something like a CrossFit gym setting, even having somebody who has no exercise background coming into a CrossFit style class can be very challenging. And therefore, gyms have created almost like an on-ramp or an introduction-like system where they have had people go through a series of smaller group, everybody's kind of at the same introductory period type of class before they transition into the big class. I've seen this a lot with my older clients as well. If you have people who have been in your program for 6 to 8 months, and then you have a couple people who have never touched a weight or haven't done any sort of exercise-based prescription and have multiple pain points, it's very hard for them to feel comfortable coming into that type of setting. The way that you can do that depends obviously on your background. For me as a physical therapist, that is meant usually that I get people to do a comprehensive physiotherapy assessment with me where I'm assessing functional movements and I'm doing a brief introduction to some of the main exercises that we would select for in that exercise class. And I've talked about some of the specific functional assessments, things like taking a really good subjective history, getting their vitals and looking at any cardiovascular history, doing some of these functional outcome measures where we're looking at the amount of physical reserve that a person has, things like the short physical performance battery, looking at falls history, some of the outcome measures that are on the steady assessment tool, things like that. And it can be very independent, like depending on where your setting is, but making sure that you have a really strong intake process is going to be very important. Based on that assessment, I will see if a person is appropriate to go right into a group setting. And for some people that are, they don't have tons of pain points, their medical history isn't super complicated, they're doing pretty well, they can, from that assessment, I have a good background history on them, then they can transition into the exercise program. For some people whose medical history is slightly more complicated, whose physical function is a little bit lower, I will start with them one-on-one, and I will give the justification that, one, jumping right into an hour-long class that can have periods of relative high intensity is going to be very strenuous on that person. The amount of motor learning that they want or that they need in order to feel comfortable going into the class is going to be higher. And so allowing me to develop rapport, increase that therapeutic alliance, and make sure that they are doing everything safely and correctly, or know the way that they are going to scale each movement is really, really important. And that is kind of on a case-to-case basis. So after the assessment, there's kind of two ways that I get an individual to come into some of our exercise programs. And a lot of my physical therapy is exercise focused, especially with my older clients anyway. So I will have either they will go right into class, or I will have them do one-on-one with me for, maybe a couple of sessions, maybe more depending again on the person, and then have them transition into the group class from there. Another strategy that I've used, if the end goal is to have them into our group exercise program, is to, if another one of my therapists or another one of my coaches is teaching class, to have them run side by side with the program. So they're seeing me and I'm with them one-on-one, but we are kind of loosely following the template that's in the class. And I'm trying to make those social connections so that the transition into our group-based program is a little bit more smooth, a little bit easier, and they can kind of know what to expect so that it isn't really overwhelming as they come into our group class. Okay, so that's number one. So how we're getting them into the program. Number two is who is running the class. And again, there's a wide range of options here. I'm just going to kind of tell you a little bit of our experience. For Stave Off, we either have a physiotherapist run the class. I like running some of our group classes. It's a good way for me to have touch points with people to, if new injuries or issues or stress has gotten higher, a way for me to kind of stay in the loop with everybody. And I think there's a lot of value, and a lot of my older clients see a lot of value in having a class that is run by a physiotherapist, by having that, that confidence in their medical staff. We have also had kinesiologists and physiotherapy assistants that we have specifically trained on how to scale, modify, correct, and prescribe exercise dosage for older clients. When you come into Stave Off, we do a lot of teaching with our teaching of our older clients. Yes, that too. But we do a lot of teaching of exercise principles and exercise-based prescription with our staff. And so we want to make sure that they feel comfortable to be able to run some of these classes. And often that can either be side by side with the physical therapist kind of overseeing the project and having some of our physiotherapy assistants or kinesiologists running the class, or a combination of the two. And so figuring out before you start this program, who is going to be running the program, what is their education, what is any gaps in their knowledge that are going to be really important given the patient population that you are going to be working with, because we know that working with older adults is very broad, and kind of having those conversations and thinking about it preemptively is going to be really important to ensure success with the start of the program. Okay, so we have the class structure, how we get a person to come into the group class, the staff to run the program. The third thing that we look at is the size of the group. What often happens, so in some of our public settings, when we have like these big falls prevention initiatives, for example, sometimes we need to err on the side of conservative because we have a staff to client ratio of 1 to 15 to 20. When you are trying to challenge an older client, especially if you're doing things like challenging their balance, you want to make sure that there is enough attention being given to each person. For that reason, at Stave Off, we try to keep our classes with our older clients to a 1 to 6, 1 to 8 at the most ratio of staff to clients. And we found that to be kind of the sweet spot. When we're up around 8, even that is usually with people who have been with us for a while. And that means that, they're pretty comfortable with the exercises. They're usually pretty safe. They know how to progress, all that kind of thing. And 6 is kind of ideal. So a 1 to 6 ratio, it allows us to be able to see everybody as they're moving through some of their strength-based movements and circuits, and ensuring that we're able to modify and scale on the fly in a really appropriate way. That being said, if you have more demand than that and you are higher, it's not that it can't be done. I would just recommend that you have another staff there. And that can be student volunteers that you're trying to teach if the financial capacity is just not there, or you're trying to keep the cost of the class low. It's completely up to you. I just want to make sure that safety is paramount when you're teaching some of these group-based programs. Okay, so we have entry into the class, who is going to be running the class, how big the class is going to be. Number 4 that I get people to think about is the infrastructure of the facility. And what I mean by this. So when we are thinking about where we are running some of these exercise programs, it can range from, church basements to the gym part of a clinic to a lot of CrossFit gyms. We've seen these amazing examples of seniors classes that have been run in different CrossFit gyms. And the way that these facilities are set up, the two most important things that I tend to think about, or I guess three, one is accessibility. Are people going to be able to get in and out? Can they go to the bathroom if they need to? You know, if you're looking at new facilities, and if that might be a barrier, try and think about how to work through those barriers before you get started or before you sign any agreements. Is number one. Number two, there's a lot of CrossFit gyms, which is where I started some of my seniors classes, that don't have air conditioning or heat. And some of my older clients in particular are very sensitive to that fluctuation in temperature, particularly heat. And so I have had some struggles with my exercise programs in CrossFit gyms in the summertime because it's very easy for some of my older clients to overheat. They get very uncomfortable. They have a hard time regulating their temperature, plus their heart rate is going up. And so I've had to make modifications to my exercise-based prescription when I'm in a more hot and humid setting than I have in more of a winter time when it's colder, or at Stave Off now, where one of the things that we made sure that we had when we went into our space was air conditioning, so that we could continue to run our programs year round. So something to think about that I didn't think about before I started out with some of my exercise programs. The fifth thing is around exercise prescription. The way that we run our programs is that when you come into our classes for our older clients, we have a template that is on the board. This is very similar to like a CrossFit gym. You would come in and there would be a workout on the board. The reason why we do that is because we kind of have, okay, we're going to try and work a little bit more on upper body and core work before we get into our circuit for today, for example. Then we have the coach kind of go through with each individual and figure out what their appropriate level and scaling will be. And this has been the way that's been most successful for us, because trying to do individual programs and have everybody doing different things can be very hard to watch as a coach. But if you have, say we're doing sit to stands or squats, and we have some people who are doing free squats, we have some people who are squatting to a high box, some people that are squatting to a low box, some people have a weight in front. Even though those are all different exercises, they're all permutations of the same thing. And so it allows us to be able to have everybody kind of doing the same class, but we are making sure that we're addressing each individual's medical history, level of function, and things like that. The second thing from the exercise prescription perspective that I would make sure that we think about before we start with some of our programming is a person's ability to get onto the ground and the person's ability to change from, for example, lying to sitting to moving around. So we can have things like postural hypotension or any vestibular issues in some of our older clients. So if we're getting them to switch positions all the time, it can be hard on that individual and extremely fatiguing. That's not to say that I don't get people on the floor. I actually really encourage people getting on the floor, but I think about when I'm doing it, how often I'm getting them to change positions, and what their level is. So in terms of reps and sets, I'm going to be very considerate of a person's individual level. And so with that, for the exercise-based prescription principles, I become a master of scale. And so Dustin talks about Prosecco. So it's about position, the amount of resistance that you're using, the speed at which you're completing that task, and cognition. So we want to make sure that for each individual coming into the class, we have different options and different levels available depending on who is in the class. And the thing when you're doing an exercise-based program that is more of a gym membership rather than a one-to-one physiotherapy appointment is that you can't necessarily always, I guess you can if you only have one class available, but for us, we have multiple classes available and they're in different times throughout the day. So I don't know necessarily who is going to be at our 1 o'clock class on Monday or who is going to be at our 7:30 class on Wednesday. And because of that, I need to make sure that my coaches and myself are equipped to have that template and then know exactly how we're going to scale it to make sure that one, people are being challenged, but two, that people are being safe. And so those are kind of some of the things that we think about. Okay, so I think that is kind of the way that we master it, or we try and master it. So we think about, entry into the class, who is running it, the size, the facility, what the facility looks like, the way that we're programming, and then how we become a master of scale. In terms of how we market the program, we do talk with physicians and different healthcare providers about some of the things that we offer at Stave Off. But actually, one of the best ways that we have increased enrollment into our classes is through Facebook advertising. And I think it's a common misconception that some of my older clients are not on social media. I would say that it's probably the opposite, especially on Facebook. Because if we think about, people who are in their 20s, they're scrolling so fast and barely reading what is happening on their newsfeed because they're so inundated by so many different social media channels. And my clients who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who are on Facebook to see what their grandkids are doing and what their great grandkids are doing and what their children are doing, are going and reading every single thing, including some of the offers that we do through Stave Off in some of our advertising and marketing. And so if you're looking to start a program and you are looking for enrollment into said program, having a physiotherapist that is there in the facility is a great way to start increasing enrollment and recruitment, kind of with two streams that can really help each other. And then the other thing is Facebook. That's kind of probably the two best ways, on top of course, like physician referrals and things like that. Kind of a more traditional marketing stream that we have used at Stave Off with a good deal of success. All right, that is it for today. I have 22 minutes. I have babbled on for quite some time. I hope that was helpful for you. If you guys have any other questions about some of the ways that we set up some of our programs, I often get questions about the business side of it. I'm totally available for you. Let me know. You can comment below, tag Christina Previtt in it so that I can see it. There's a lot that happens on the ICE channel, as you know, so I have to make sure that I keep checking. But I hope you guys found that useful, and it was great to meet everyone at CSM, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.